downtown Decatur. It's the Faber Files. Hello, I'm your host, Bill Faber. Because democracy demands debate, we present this program of public issues and interests concerning our local community. Tonight's presentation is part 2 of the historical presentation of the mining wars in West Virginia at the turn of the century. Our presenter is Sarah Lynch Thomason from Tennessee, and she will be presenting still images along with historic roots music to bring history alive, to show the struggle of mining families for respect, for dignity, and for their family. Join us in part 2 of this presentation at Millikan University. Thanks for watching.
The coal operators, too, felt they had been cheated. They saw the UMWA as a menace whose intent was to take control of all labor. A Logan County coal operator explained, "It is the purpose of the United Mine Workers first to unionize the mines and then increase their demands for labor. Until at last, it will not be worthwhile for anyone to own the mines. And then they'll take possession of the mines themselves. In a word, to establish a Soviet government." Lenin and Trotsky demanded no more. The strikes had created an intense state of paranoia amongst the coal operators, which would produce steadfast refusals to compromise and future labor unrest. For union members, the strikes produced misgivings about past UMWA leadership. The next few years witnessed elections that produced a more militant group of officials who were seen as firm defenders of the miners' rights and unwilling to cave under pressure. Recognized as leaders were Bill Blizzard, Frank Keeney, elected president, Fred Mooney voted secretary-treasurer, and William Petrie voted vice president. Within 3 months of their elections, 2,000 new union members were enrolled, 12 new locals organized, and District 17 of West Virginia had the largest membership in its history. The advent of World War I brought forth an explosion of coal production, much needed for ships carrying soldiers and supplies in the Atlantic. With West Virginia's bituminous coal providing 1/4 of the entire supply to the nation, miners were excluded from the draft, and most enjoyed higher pay and consistent work. The United Mine Workers Journal declared, "Dig coal, dig more coal, dig still more coal. The success of the war depends on the coal you dig." Patriotic West Virginia mining families invested heavily in war and liberty bonds and worked poor conditions that in pre-war years would have justified walkouts and protest. However, as the war drew to a close, UMWA National President John L. Lewis was aware that coal prices would soon drop, and mass unemployment for miners across the country could become a swift reality. The UMWA declared a national strike in November of 1919. Though much of West Virginia responded, the mines of Mingo and Logan counties continued work as usual. The miners in the Kanawha and New River fields were ready to respond. The pro-democracy rhetoric of the war years had produced a more politicized class of miners, well equipped to recognize the ironies of fighting injustice abroad but ignoring oppressive realities at home. One miner said, "The miners have been overseas fighting to save the world for democracy, but we found the conditions here more hellish than they were over there." At a District 17 convention in 1919, Keeney stated that the miners in the southwest counties of Mingo and Logan have repeatedly appealed for assistance in organizing and have no security whatever in their civil and constitutional rights so long as the criminal and unlawful mine guard system is maintained. Efforts to organize Mingo and Logan began in earnest in the fall of 1919. District 17 and 29 of West Virginia voted to send in 50 organizers. A daring campaign was underway. There's a call in West Virginia that appeals to you and me, to the unions of this country for to set the miner free, in their homes among the mountains at the mercy of the boss, men, women, little children fighting bravely at a loss. Union organizers who went into Logan County soon came back bruised and bloody, if they came back at all. It was all because of Logan County's High Sheriff, Don Chafin. A visiting D.C. reporter commented, "Everywhere one goes down in this county, he hears the name of Don Chafin. One can see that he has struck terror into the hearts of the people in the Union fields. Every kind of crime is charged to him and his deputies. He reigned supreme by virtue of a state machine backed by the power of the operators. When the injured organizers were shown to Governor John J. Cornwell, who had been elected in 1917, Cornwell refused to take action. The Kanawha and New Riverfield miners, remembering the passive behavior of the state during the Paint Creek Wars, were enraged. Messages quickly spread, calling for the miners to mobilize. On September 4, 1919, at the mouth of Lynns Creek near Marmet, Kanawha County, over 5,000 pro-union miners amassed, intending to march southwest to Logan. Panicking local officials sent word to Cornwell, who arrived in the middle of the night to calm the crowd. UMWA official Frank Keeney described the scene. The moon was shining and the campfires were there, and there were in that crowd over 5,000 rifles. It looked more like Dante's Inferno than anything I can think of, with the moonlight shining on the rifles. The governor admonished the marchers, but also promised an investigation into the conditions of Logan County, promises that would later go unfulfilled. Though the miners were skeptical of Cornwell's assurances, they dissolved their plans to march. This massive show of collective strength would not be soon forgotten by the state or the Union miners, and it was a precursor to greater battles to come. Despite the oppression met by operator-controlled forces, over 2,700 men joined the Union from 1919 to 1920. The Southwest exploded in wildcat strikes. In one field alone, there were over 63 work stoppages in an 11-month period. By the spring of 1920, enough locals had been established in Mingo County that Keeney felt confident in asking its coal operators for recognition and new contracts. The companies promptly refused and proceeded to evict miners from their homes. With so many thousands now homeless, and new Baldwin Felts agents being called in, the organizing drive swiftly developed into a state of war. On May 19, 1920, a battle took place in the center of the town of Matewan, Mingo County. Baldwin agents, fresh from evicting Union miners nearby, encountered local officials, Mayor Cable Testerman and Sheriff Sid Hatfield. Both men were steadfast defenders of the local miners' rights. The parties exchanged some quick words, and the town exploded into battle. Matewan deputies assigned to wait for the Felts agents at the train station jumped into the fray. Panicking townspeople ran into nearby homes or swam across the Tug River to Kentucky. Cable Testerman was shot and died later that day. In total, 4 Matewan residents and 7 detectives were killed. 2 of those detectives, Lee and Albert Felts, were brothers to Tom Felts, head of the agency in Bluefield. Dixie Accord, who was 7 at the time, recalled, "That night, I don't think anybody slept. They expected the Felts detectives to come in there and blow the city of Matewan up. It just seemed like the end of the world to me." The strike community rejoiced for the deaths of the agents. During a time when most fighting occurred under cover of forest or through sabotage, it was a rare thing to see such open resistance against the hated agents. "You see them there below the damn scab herders, puppets on the greedy owner's string. We'll make them pay for all their dirty murders. We'll show them how a starving hate can sting. We'll show them how a starving hate can sting." Though Matewan residents, including Sid Hatfield, were taken to court, local sentiment was so greatly in favor of the miners that no one was found guilty of killing the agents. Through the rest of 1920 and ongoing into the spring of 1921, Mingo and Logan counties continued to experience warfare. Fighting persisted in towns, strike camps, along creeks, at train stations. Residents lined their beds with iron siding for fear of being shot during skirmishes. During what came to be called the 3 Days Battle, which spread into Kentucky, a group of citizens sent a message requesting help, saying the following: "Families driven from their homes, others penned in cellars 48 hours without food or water, not yet rescued. State, constabulary, and local officers unable to cope with situation. Condition is one of civil war." In the fall of 1921, a few critical events proved to ignite an overwhelming reaction from the strike community that would be felt across the nation. On August 1st, in front of dozens of witnesses, Sid Hatfield and friend Ed Chambers were shot and killed by Baldwin agents on the courthouse steps in Welch, McDowell County. On August 2nd, Sid and Ed returned to Mate 1 in coffins and were buried with some 2,000 mourners in attendance. The strikers were incensed at the open, blatant murders of the men. Around the same time, the Union had been planning to send large numbers of organizers to Mingo County. Their hopes had been to prompt mass arrests of the men, putting them in prison for several days. This would have, in turn, outraged tax-paying citizens in the county and gained media attention. But Sid and Ed's death had both warring sides tense and ready for battle. With this in mind, District 17 called off the action, with Keeney stating, "My men are willing to go to jail, but I am not willing to have them killed." However, the energy that had built for the action did not diminish. Instead, it was merely redirected to a mounting sense of outrage that grew throughout that August. Mother Jones organized a rally at the Capitol, calling one last time for intervention from the governor. Governor Morgan, who had taken office that year, refused to respond to the miners' requests. And, to incense the situation further, the miners learned that a state Supreme Court had ruled to keep several hundreds of their comrades imprisoned in Mingo County. In late August, thousands of miners began to assemble near Marmet, Kanawha County, just as they had 2 years before. As word spread, supporters poured in from the surrounding areas, as well as from out of state. By August 23rd, the valley surrounding Marmet was teeming with an army of Union miners and sympathizers, ready to bring justice to the southern West Virginia coal fields. Mother Jones had once warned, "Injustice boils in men's hearts as does steel in its cauldron, ready to pour forth white hot in the fullness of time." After so much warfare, all in the pursuit of basic rights, the mining community had reached a breaking point. By August 25th, marchers began to head southwest in groups. Amongst their goals was to overthrow Chafin's authority in Logan, and then move on to Mingo to free their comrades. Generals from D.C. hurried to West Virginia and ordered Keeney and Mooney to stop the march. The officials attempted to make the miners turn around, but to little avail. And as the marchers moved south, they sang, "We're gonna hang Don Chafin from a sour apple tree. We're gonna hang Don Chafin from a sour apple tree. We're gonna hang Don Chafin from a sour apple tree. Our truth is marching on." The marchers traveled not only on foot, but by automobile and rail car. They hijacked trains and turned them towards the Logan border. To distinguish their friends from their enemies, they used passwords. When asked, "Where are you going?" a marshal would reply, "To Mingo." The next question, "How do you come?" The answer, "I come creeping." More joined the marchers' numbers, bringing what weapons they had from home, hunting rifles and pistols. Over in Logan County, Don Chafin, correctly fearing an invasion, amassed a force of over 1,000 volunteers and state troopers to guard the county borders. On August 30th, Reverend Thomas Wilburn, who sided with the miners, led 75 men up Blair Mountain in order to cross into Logan. They encountered 4 of Chafin's deputies, who failed to give the correct password, and the Battle of Blair Mountain commenced. "I'm going to Harts Creek Mountain, boys, I'm going to old Blair Mountain Hill. I'm gonna fight for my Union, I know it's Mother Jones' will." Meanwhile, to the northwest at Crooked Creek Gap in Logan County, the marchers made several attempts to overwhelm Chafin's troops. On September 1st, a breakthrough was made, and the marchers swept south, reaching within 4 miles of the town of Logan. Throughout the rebellion, Governor Morgan had been pleading with Washington to send in federal troops. On August 30th, President Harding issued a proclamation ordering all peoples involved in the insurrection to return home by Thursday, September 1st. The marchers, thick in battle, ignored Harding's appeal. That same day, the president finally decided to send in troops, and word slowly spread amongst the marchers that U.S. soldiers had come to stop them. As infuriated as they were with the local government, the marchers were not willing to fight federal troops. Many were veterans of the First World War and felt a love of their nation, if not the local authorities. The march dissipated. Some marchers did surrender their weapons, but most disappeared into the woods and headed for home. Out of the march with an estimated 10,000 participants, only 400 guns were turned in to federal troops. Cush Garrett, who was a boy at the time, recalled years later, "Men stuck guns everywhere, just in hollow logs, under rocks, or anywhere. I can remember my brother-in-law saw the edge of an army blanket sticking under the fence. He pulled it out, and there was a whole bunch of guns under there." The coal operators hoped to use the rebellion as a way to destroy the Union in West Virginia. Not long after the fighting ended, Keeney, Mooney, and 550 others were charged with treason by the state of West Virginia. The trials were held in Charlestown, in the West Virginia Panhandle, far away from the coal fields. But contrary to what the coal companies had hoped for, the trials and succeeding federal investigations exposed the cruel practices of the companies and largely exonerated the strike community. From the New York Tribune. In his testimony in the West Virginia treason trial, Governor Morgan made the extraordinary admission that a private government whose army consists of notorious mine guards exists in his state, and that though opposed to it, he is powerless to end it. If this condition exists, it would seem that the treason prosecution should be against the organizers and maintainers of this private government, rather than against the citizens of the state who went on the warpath to suppress it. With sympathy stacked for the miners and the failings of the state made dismally clear, the charges were overwhelmingly dissolved. Excepting 2 men, all marchers walked away free. Hurrah, hurrah, the truth shall make us free. Hurrah, hurrah, for dear humanity, the right to work that all proclaim till men united be, is God's free gift to the people. A letter from a miner to the United Mine Workers Journal. We are waiting for the time to come when all places can say what we are saying today, 100% organization, and then we can all live in peace and harmony. From another letter. Let us change the system of master and slave, and then the people of the United States will be able to say for once that this is the land of the free and the home of the brave. Though brief, the uprising had vindicated the political sentiments of the strikers and confirmed the collective power of West Virginia's mining community. However, the trials were extremely expensive for the UMWA. The union's treasury was completely drained at state and national levels, all spent on legal defense costs. In addition, economic depression, an unsuccessful national strike in 1922, and a resurgence in anti-union sentiment led to a decline in the UMWA's popularity. It would not be until the signing of the Wagner Act in 1935 that unions across the nation would win the right to collective bargaining, strikes, and other organizing activities. Blair Mountain, site of so many days of fighting, remains a rare and powerful resource for historians, union members, and the local community. The artifacts uncovered there in the past 20 years have been giving us a more accurate and intimate understanding of the uprising. Sadly, Blair is owned by a land company, National Resource Partners, that intends to mine the mountain for coal. The companies who are leased to mine the mountain are Arch Coal and Alpha Natural Resources. The method they will use is mountaintop removal coal mining. This is a system of strip mining that scrapes off topsoil and trees and blasts away at rock to uncover thin seams of coal underneath. This form of surface mining utterly destroys ecosystems. An area the size of Delaware has already been ravaged by this form of mining, and over 2,000 miles of streams have been buried at a very modest estimate. Over the past several decades, several attempts have been made to put Blair Mountain on the National Register of Historic Places, which would largely protect it from surface mining. In 2009, because of repeated efforts by groups like Friends of Blair Mountain and others, the National Park Service placed Blair on the register. Mysteriously, 2 months later, in 2010, the mountain was delisted. It would be an understatement to say that there is strong suspicion that the mountain was removed from the register due to coal company pressure. In the summer of 2011, in reaction, a coalition of organizations including Friends of Blair Mountain and Appalachia Rising launched a week-long march retracing the miners' route from Marmet to Blair Mountain. The purpose of this march was stated to demand sustainable job creation in all Appalachian communities, abolish mountaintop removal, strengthen labor rights, and preserve Blair Mountain. Each day, over 200 marchers, including myself, walk between 5 to 15 miles along narrow roads in 90 to 100 degree temperatures. Throughout, we used music to keep morale strong, adapting songs from the civil rights movement and other traditions. We're gonna march our way to Blair, and we'll stand with our comrades there. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. The march brought national media attention to the plight of Blair, but winning preservation of this battlefield continues to be a huge challenge. Cecil Roberts, UMWA president, has said, "Blair Mountain is as close to sacred ground as there is for the UMWA. Though we may not physically own the mountain, its legacy is ours." This mountain has in some ways a good chance of being saved, because its significance touches the lives of people who care about labor's history and the health of America's land. The mountain isn't only a valuable battle site, it's also a precious part of the local ecosystem. But Blair's legacy stretches beyond Appalachia to all members of the working class, to all of those who have listened to that inner spark that says we are worth more than any hierarchy instructs us to be. The battle for human dignity continues in the many struggles we participate in, and we have the right to celebrate and preserve the history of the people who have brought us here. Hurrah, hurrah, the truth shall make us free. Hurrah, hurrah, for dear humanity, the right to work, let all proclaim till men united be, is God's free gift to the people. Thank you. I'd like to spend some time taking any questions about the history or about the Blair Pathways Project, which I talked a little bit about at the beginning, and what's going on to save Blair. Any questions folks have? Okay, now there's several. There were none, and then there were several at once. Let's work from the back. Yes, you.
What kind of sustainable jobs are being conceived of to, I mean, I know a lot of the miners are in favor of mountaintop mining, just because they need jobs, they need food, they need to feed their families. And obviously that's not sustainable.
Sure. Right, so this is a really big question because in these regions, coal is largely disappearing. It's definitely a finite resource, and we're moving towards the end of what can be mined there. And mountaintop removal is really a symptom of that, of what's happening, because part of why mountaintop removal was designed was to get at thinner and thinner seams of coal that it didn't feel practical to mine through deep mining techniques. So that is a big question, and it's hard to answer. I think that there needs to be a very diverse economy in the region. People need to be working a lot of different jobs that are sustainable with the environment. Some groups are trying to develop solar-based jobs. Some groups are, it really comes down to even projects in local communities for people to learn what valuable plants there are in the region to go out and dig and sell to pharmaceutical companies, because you can do that at a profit and you can do it sustainably. So it depends on where you are, but the answer to making it healthy means that it needs to be much more diverse than it's been. It can't be just coal. And unfortunately, what it's looking like might be a new economy in the region is natural gas through fracking. And people might have different opinions on that, but in my opinion, that's an extremely harmful form of mining as well. It's really, really devastating, even though it doesn't look like it on the surface. So we hope there can be other kinds of economies in that region. There were some questions moving up this way along my left-hand side. Yes?
What is the status of the historic site thing with the National Park Service? And then what can, if they're interested, what could people do to nudge the Park Service to put it back on the list?
The Park Service needs more than a nudge, unfortunately. So the status of Blair right now is that there is one mining permit pending. It's up for renewal. It's called the Adkins Fork Service Permit, and it would definitely go straight to the heart of the battlefield. It would destroy a good deal of the battlefield. In reaction, partially in reaction to that delisting, in 2011, the Sierra Club actually filed a lawsuit against the National Park Service, saying that the delisting was inappropriate for several reasons. And unfortunately, a federal judge overturned that case recently. So at this point, there's a group called the Blair Mountain Heritage Alliance that is working with the local community around Blair that's going to be affected by the strip mining, and also working on opposing these surface permits and getting at the Office of Surface Mining and trying to agitate those folks about it. And they can be connected to on a website called blairmountain.org, really easy to get to. And if nothing else, if you wanted to go on there and sign a petition saying you oppose the strip mining of Blair, that would be wonderful. There are many other ways to participate, and we have quarter sheets on the table over here with connections to websites where you can go on and just plug in however you would like to help. I mean, send the National Park Service a letter. I think that's great. And if you sign up onto our mailing list, I can give more details about who to send that information to. Does someone up here have a question?
You answered my question.
I answered your question.
Just curious, is West Virginia still a union state, or is it a right-to-work state? Two questions. And the second question is a bit ironic, I think. Wasn't J. Rockefeller
Yes.
the governor? And what was his stance on all of it?
I actually, both of those questions I wish I could answer better than I can. I don't know if West Virginia is a right-to-work state. Those are your questions. And I don't know enough about J. Rockefeller's time as governor in office in West Virginia. I think Travis Steinling, who's here, could probably speak to that a little bit.
West Virginia is still a union state, and Rockefeller has been ambivalent about coal for much of his time as senator. Great state.
Sorry, you got the history wrong there. Yeah.
What instrument are you using, and is it typically an instrument you would use for the style of music?
Oh, I'm so excited you asked. This is a mountain dulcimer, also called a lap dulcimer. It was very common. You would find this much more commonly in Appalachia about 100 years ago or longer. It's considered one of the only truly American instruments in the sense that this, alongside the banjo, were the only instruments that developed independently here in the United States, brought in by immigrants.
Come sing, fellow working men, my story I'll relate. How workers in the coal mines fare in Pennsylvania state. Come hear a sad survivor from beside children's graves, and learn how free Americans are treated.